Mr. Speaker, this 24 billion 567 budget. Everyone is saying it's the biggest, and I say it's the right thing to do. We're a growing country. We cannot listen to prophets of doom who will say that this and that will happen. A money plan limit of 12 months is all. It can be adjusted, but at least at the very basic, Mr. Speaker, this government has got a plan that is sensible, fair and balanced. And Mr. Speaker, if we look at it, it captures everything. In terms of managing the budget deficit, you're looking at the deficit that will be lesser by 1 billion kina. But Mr. Speaker, as you all know, deficit budgets are important. They are necessary. They are a necessary evil if we have to progress as a country. No country in this world except countries like Singapore, for instance, or even countries from the Scandinavian region like Norway, Sweden or Denmark are able to have surplus budget after surplus budget. Even one of the most powerful countries on earth, the United States, operates on deficit budget year after year. And even our deficit percentage is minor compared to the percentage that the United States has. So having a deficit budget, Mr. Speaker, is very important. And when I see that budget, it captures everything, everything. And as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing wrong with borrowing. If the intentions are correct, and if we have good budget strategy management plans, we can borrow to the hilt. As long as we know that we've got projects in the pipeline, we've got non-renewable and renewable projects in the pipeline, all it'll take is years, and when they mature, we will be able to repay those. And Mr. Speaker, ever since we became independent, we as a country have never failed to repay our loans. There's never been any default. So these are records we should all be proud of. And if you look at it, Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to start with the very important issue of law and order, this is a responsible government. And when we know that we've got many different countries, if I may use the term, operating under one country, having so many different languages, more than 700 different languages, many different cultures, and all we are held together is the rule of law. When we have a functioning law and order machinery, we'll all advance. And the government, I must acknowledge, has done the right thing by allocating a lot of money to this particular sector. In fact, if you look at the law and order component, 401 million has been allocated. And that I can say is one of the largest in the history of this country to date. And I don't think we are on the wrong track. And that money will be put to good use. And we've heard about the Treasurer talking about increasing the size of our police force from 4,000 to 5,000, for instance, to start with. And we've also allocated money to the magisterial services. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, for most of our people, their first encounter with the law is our magistrates, starting from the village court magistrates to the magisterial service in the urban areas. And we've allocated, and if you can look at the figures from the past, the magisterial service were dealing with nearly 3 million kina every year, and this government has increased. And that is a good example. Even the increase of judges to manage our law and order sector, we have helped the judiciary by completing the payment for that very large Supreme and National Court complex. And we have been able to, as a government, pay off what has been due. And on top of that, we are giving another big increase to the judiciary. So when we have all those things all lined up in the law and order sector, I think the government has finally managed to get the balance right, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of infrastructure, again, $9.7 billion. Connect PNG, roads, infrastructure, telecommunications, ports, everything else, schools, hospitals, power supplies, water supplies. We are able to allocate money especially for those very important infrastructure. We as a country going forward must build those. And they are, as I said, a necessary evil. And no one should complain about spending more money on those sort of things. And every country has done it, Mr. Speaker, and I think we've got it right. And also in the economic sector, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister in his wisdom, for the first time, was able to announce 4 new ministries, starting with the Minister for Coffee, the Ministry for Livestock, the Ministry for Oil Palm. This is where our people are. The bulk of our people are. They involved in those very sectors. And the government, for the first time, is able to identify and selectively fund those ministries and try to invest money in that sector. And even creating, by the Prime Minister has even gone to the extent of, under this government, creating a new ministry of international trade. And as we all know, our leaders, we as a country do not operate alone. You know. We need to establish and give some concentrated effort into international trade. That is where we export our resources. So in terms of creation of the new ministries, I think we've done well. For the first time since independence, we are trying to set the balance right, get it right, fund them properly, and over the next 12 years, make sure that our people enjoy the benefits that we all think they should be. And also, Mr. Speaker, more especially in the case of SOEs, as we all know, the SOEs employ more than 7,000 employees, and their combined value is about 4 billion kina. These are important resources we can't ignore. And if we take the example of Singapore, although a country with no resources like ours has been able to transform all these SOEs into now the much talked about, much admired Temasek. And if we're able to set our plans correctly and the basic framework right, we should be able to get there, and it'll only take a number of years, provided there is less political interference, proper attention to budgetary frameworks, proper attention to the way we manage those companies. We should be able to get there. And I must commend and I must thank at this juncture the Prime Minister and the government for specially allocating a much needed 200 million kina to the KCS group of companies. They'll enable us, Mr. Speaker, to fix all the rundown, aging infrastructure that we find in PNG Power, most of the rundown facilities that we find in telecom, and in water PNG, and the list goes on. That money, Mr. Speaker, will be put to good use under a responsible government, Mr. Speaker. So I think we've got it right. And on top of that, we must not forget that 3 other SOEs, especially, or 2 other SOEs, especially Kumul Mineral Holdings, have been restructured, and we think they are better positioned to actually earn the returns that we expect from them. And not forgetting Kumul Petroleum Holdings, which continues to declare dividend after dividend. So these things can happen when we have the right government in place, right policies, and the right support. So I think, Mr. Speaker, the decision by this government to give due recognition to SOEs is the right step, and it's actually historic in the making, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we can talk about all of this, but when our young people are leaderless and do not have much to do, we all know, Mr. Speaker, they resort to things like alcohol, for instance. And this government has done the right thing by imposing more tax. It will now be very difficult for our companies which import and sell alcohol to sell alcohol at a price that can be economical for them. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, we indirectly discouraging the consumption of alcohol. Mr. Speaker, if we do not, as a government, manage this important issue in every village and every society, we will have problems which will be caused by our youths who consume a lot of alcohol. And more importantly, Mr. Speaker, if we are able to also use the increased funding that we've given to the law and order sector, and if we're able to control the way our young people consume the so-called spark brews, unless we're able to do that, Mr. Speaker, we will have problems in our country. You can have all the wealth, you can have all the educated young population, but if we do not take care of the minority, they will continue to hold this country to ransom. And I think the government has done the right thing by making sure that we allocate funds to deal with that, and also making sure that we increase the tax that is payable for alcohol consumers, Mr. Speaker. In relation to the debt strategy, Mr. Speaker, all of us are also equally as leaders concerned about the level of debts that we're incurring as a government. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, as long as you have a comprehensive and manageable debt strategy, we will be fine, Mr. Speaker. And from the budget document that I have seen, that Treasurer has done a tremendous job, and I commend him for that. This budget has enough strategies to be able to help us manage and reduce our debt, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there's another historic and groundbreaking decision this government has made. Year in, year out, Mr. Speaker, we hear about issues relating to settlements, land grabbing, lack of space in the urban sectors, lack of land for large commercial agricultural projects. This time around, Mr. Speaker, this government under the leadership of our Prime Minister has done the right thing, and it has made specific allocation of more than 100 million kina to be able to help us manage this very important issue of land. If we're able to use that money to acquire more land from our traditional landowners, we should be able to see the increase in the size of our urban centers, the cities and towns. So, Mr. Speaker, that is a step in the right direction. If we look at the budget, if we look at each item, Mr. Speaker, we have adequately been able to allocate funding where we think is necessary to be able to enable us to manage ourselves. So, Mr. Speaker, to conclude, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, it is a responsible, balanced, and a sensible budget. And finally, when I look at it, and I look at the area where I come from, and I think I speak for all of us, our Prime Minister, although he is not obligated, has been allowed to continue the practice of at least ensuring that each of the electorates get a minimum of 10 million plus some additional funds for infrastructure projects. These are not constitutional grants, Mr. Speaker. The only constitutional grant that we are entitled to as a member, as we all know, is our DSG of 500,000 kina. And for a Prime Minister to be able to allow the continuation of that important program speaks volumes about this government. We care about each other, just like the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. This is a responsible government. I think we're on the right track, and I would commend this budget, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.